Welcome back to this now. South Africa is unlikely to see an Arab Spring despite a myriad of challenges, particularly in marginalised communities. This is according to political writer and author Dr. Ebrahim Harvey. He argues that this is due to a lack of organisation and mobilisation. Dr. Harvey joins us now to expand more on his views. Dr. Harvey, a very good evening to you and thank you so much for your time. So you penned an article with News 24 where you were asking the question, could we see an Arab Spring in South Africa? And this was on the back of what was once said by analyst Moeletsi Mbeki when he said that South Africa could possibly see an Arab Spring. But then you go on to just describe the different challenges that are affecting South Africans, especially those in the townships. But you say this is not most likely to happen anytime in South Africa. Can you expand that for us?
Yeah, I attempt in that column, to give a historical background to this matter and draw attention of the readers to the fact that I think what has happened is in post-apartheid South Africa, the political sting that characterized very volatile, township-based struggles during the apartheid period seemed to have ebbed somewhat from 1994 onwards, but it picked up, and it picked up very dramatically in the 2000s. I don't know if you can remember the social movements, uprisings in the townships led by the Anti-Privatization Forum, APF, and other social movements. When that died out, and it died out in the 2000s, we've had this vacuum in the townships, which is now been, many issues go by, and all you see really most of the times, and I coined this term, popcorn protests, indicating that it's for very brief durations, couple of days at most, and then it seems to peter out. And I attributed this to a lack of strong community organization. There's a difference between, organization and mobilization. It's when you strongly organized that you've got a ready basis to mobilize people around a whole lot of burning issues. And it's a countrywide problem. And you've seen with the recent VAT increase, also there were public protests, a short duration. Though, I think partly the decision to split the 1% increase might see this thing coming up again later on in the year. But it's an indication, of ongoing problems in the townships, but as I indicated, a lack of strong community organization, which gives rise to what I call these popcorn township protests, which is intense but of very brief, short duration. And that unless, the SACP has decided to go it on its own in the 2026 local government elections. And perhaps that, and in association with the South African National Civic Organization, SANCO, they might be able to inject a more organized presence in the townships that might see a transition to more long-lasting organizational-based expressions of protest in the townships.
So, Doc, even in the article, like you say, you started just pre-94 and also just in how the ANC had won the 1994 elections and seemingly had created a massive restraint in black massive resistance against it. Do you still believe that the ANC is slowly losing grip of this restraint, especially within the townships, from what we are seeing lately?
No, they're losing the restraint, political restraint for long. Don't forget that they lost the 29th May national elections for the first time, 2024. But don't forget, too, that they lost the local government elections in Gauteng, which is the powerhouse of production, nerve center of the economy, in both the 2016 and 2021 elections. So, I think the masses of people who instinctively voted for the ANC was coming to terms with the fact that, and you can see the results last year, that the loyalty, almost blind, that they paid to the ANC returning it to power has ended, and you can see what happened on the 29th of May, 2024, when the ANC had dropped to around about 40% from 57% in 2019. So those days, of blindly, loyally, traditionally voting for them is gone. And I think the best days of the ANC in that regard is gone, and I don't think it will return. So you see a more steadily awakening of people, especially in voting patterns. But the big problem which I'm trying to address in this column is that why you have these so-called popcorn protests of very intense but brief duration, and why, therefore, you're unlikely to have anything coming close to the Arab Spring uprisings, which had a more focused, organized presence, than what you've seen in South Africa. And we have to see what's going to happen, in the run-up to the 2026 local government elections, when all these burning issues in the townships, become more focused on than in earlier times. And we've got to see how it's going to pan out for the rest of this year and in the run-up to the 2026 local government elections, which will take place towards the end of next year.
Right. And just to unpack a little bit more, Doc, with regards to the popcorn protests that you make mention of, saying that they seemingly spontaneous and many of the times without visible leadership. What is it in terms of organization or disorganization that we lack as South Africans that aren't able to get us to a point where our voices are heard on a consistent level?
No, I think it's a combination of reasons. Firstly, massive disappointment with the ANC, and I mean, you can see the results, it speaks for itself. Massive disappointment. I think Black people in the townships particularly expected that at least their basic needs around water, sanitation, electricity, housing, health would be met, adequately. You look at the Freedom Charter, the Reconstruction and Development Program. None of those demands and rights have materialized. You look at today, Human Rights Day, you look at the Constitution, one of the best, most progressive constitutions in the world, with a Bill of Rights. None of those rights in the Bill of Rights has been realized. We have an ongoing sewerage, sanitation. We've had a bit of a respite to the load shedding, but ongoing problems of health, education, a whole lot of aspects of township-based struggles. And the big thing now is to see how things will pan out, regarding township protests in the run-up to the 2026 local government elections. But it's a massive disappointment. It's also a combination of the fact that the ANC had consciously used its ward committees that it controlled to actually, which I argue in the column, to demobilize communities, especially those where strong community organizations existed, rooted in the anti-apartheid struggles in the townships. And also, another big factor is that whereas before COSATU and the trade unions were very much involved in community-based struggles, even up until the 2000s, COSATU and the trade unions retreated from the struggles that they were before and organically a part of the township-based struggles. You've seen the struggles at the point of production with the factories combining with struggles at the point of reproductive consumption in the townships, merging, and that has ended. And well, the SACP has now decided to go it on its own in the elections next year. And if they combine with COSATU and SANCO, they might be able to inject a more organized presence in the townships, and who knows what might result from that process.
So just staying on the point where you speak of the ANC playing a big role in political demobilization within our townships, especially through the municipal ward committees, do you think that this has contributed to the level of consciousness, especially amongst young people today, in them not mobilizing in the way that those in Sharpeville and the June 16 youth had mobilized themselves in getting their voices heard to that extent?
No, absolutely. I mean, the ward committees and the institutional structures of local government and, controlled by the ANC until it started to lose ward committees, local government elections. The ANC dominated that terrain as they dominated national elections. But there's no doubt that the ward committees, if you look at it closely, the ANC consciously played a role in using the ward committees, to squash and to suppress independent community organizations that existed long before these ward committees arose, after the 1995 local government elections, began. And certainly it's a big, well, together with the decline of social movements, the Anti-Privatization Forum had a formidable presence in the townships until it declined in the 2000s. So it's a combination of reasons, but what is certainly very clear and evident is that the township-based struggles have ebbed. They are of much shorter duration, hence the term popcorn, and therefore lacking the kind of rigor and duration of what gave rise to the Arab Spring, that I referred to in the column, and that I pointed out the kind of problems that would need to be addressed if our struggles at local level is to escalate and reach the kind of Arab Spring organized levels it did years back.
You've already touched on this in terms of the SACP and them contesting the 2026 local elections on their own. Do you believe that there would be much of an impact in terms of more of these township structures supporting the SACP in leading forward in terms of what their particular needs are?
Yes, but a provisional yes. You see, the SACP and COSATU have had close relations. It depends, which I raise in the column, whether the SACP going it on its own will include COSATU support and also SANCO, whether SANCO would throw in its lot. And if SANCO does, although they've declined themselves very much so over the past few years, if COSATU should get involved alongside and support the SACP in the 2026 local government election, it could definitely have a massive impact, I think, in addressing the issues of a lack of organization, which has characterized township protests. But we've got to see whether COSATU does throw in its weight with the SACP. That hasn't become very clear since the SACP at its special Congress in December decided to enter the elections 2026 on its own independently. COSATU has not responded as to whether they're supporting the SACP in that stance.
Well, lastly, Dr. Harvey, looking at the momentum that has been gained by these popcorn protests that you make mention of, should we then be careful in terms of experiencing that Arab Spring in the next 5, 10, 20 years?
No, the Arab Spring took place under definite conditions, There's a whole history to that too. In South Africa, we need to revitalize the kind of township-based protests that we had before we can approximate or talk about a kind of Arab Spring, which I've said that Mletsi Mbeki has often spoken about, but which I think we are far away from, unless we make that transition to rebuild township-based organizations as it existed during the apartheid days, and then it is what the social movements paid attention to until their decline in the 2000s. And as a result of that, we've seen a massive vacuum, organizational vacuum in township-based process, which I think informed the intensity of it, but also the short duration of those protests.
All right, Dr. Harvey, thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure having you on the show. That's Dr. Ebrahim Harvey, who's a political writer and author, speaking to us there about an article that he penned on News 24 about the possibility of an Arab Spring in South Africa.